Welcome to Urban Agriculture Field Experiences, Lesson 3 of the Intro to Urban Agriculture, The Science of Soil and Growing Where We Live, offered by the Lehigh County Conservation District with support from the National Association of Conservation Districts, the Ryder Pool Foundation, and the Harry C. Trexler Trust. Did you know that the Great Dust Bowl storms of the 3030s taking place throughout the Great Plains of the United States during the country's Great Depression are considered to be the third or fourth worst natural disasters known to man? In the year of 1935 alone, more than 850 million tons of topsoil blew away from the Great Plains of America's West, leaving the residing farmers and our government beyond scared. Origins of this massive loss of soil began in the 1850s during the Great Beef Bonanza, when western U.S. lands were overgrazed with beef cattle. More devastation impaired the delicate prairie ecosystem formed over thousands of years when World War I began and there was pressure to produce enough wheat to feed our soldiers abroad in order to win the war. America's prairie land encompassing portions of Colorado, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico was considered the last frontier for agriculture, and many, even little experienced suitcase farmers, rushed to claim their own farms. During the early years of the 1900s, farming efforts boomed at first because of the wet years that allowed crops to thrive. Many farmers cleared the strong soil-holding prairie grasses and replaced the grasses with shallow wheat. Farmers then used heavy farming equipment to sow and harvest. Farmers worked the land 24 hours a day in this fragile ecosystem, leaving the now loose topsoil no other choice but to be blown away. But by the years of the Great Depression, costs for bushels of wheat fell from $2 to 40 cents when the Great West faced 8 years of drought. At first, dust storms were infrequent, but before long they were a common occurrence, and not only was the farmland no longer viable, but living conditions could be deadly. People ceased shaking hands because of the static charge in the air that could knock a grown person down if he or she touched another. Residents abandoned their farms and headed to California in search of a healthier region. Hugh Hammond Bennett, a talented soil scientist who eventually became known as the father of soil conservation, was surveying this situation. After graduating from the University of North Carolina in 1903, he began studying soil erosion in America and overseas as a surveyor before the Dust Bowl events were plentiful. He held great concern about America's farmland blowing away, and, on a day when he knew a dust storm would arrive from the west, he testified in Washington, D.C. to Congress about the ecological disasters of the West. Seeing the huge dust cloud reach D.C. was believing. Congress quickly passed legislation to form the agency now known as the Natural Resource Conservation Services, or NRCS, a governing body that regulates our soils. 2 years later, in 1937, Roosevelt drafted legislation for states to form conservation districts. Today, over 3,000 conservation districts in the United States make up the National Association of Conservation Districts, or NACD. In the state of Pennsylvania alone, we have 66 conservation districts, nearly one per county. The collective missions of conservation districts nationwide are to conserve local natural resources, primarily by keeping soil in place and watersheds clean. Thanks to Hugh Hammond and swift legislation, today we understand the great importance regarding our natural resource of soil. People often use the words dirt and soil interchangeably, but they are not. Dirt is nuisance stuff that we track into our homes or get stuck under our fingernails. Soil, however, is a living dynamic substance that sequesters greenhouse gases, provides habitat for beneficial microbes, macrobes, and other animals, filters pollution, and provides growing medium for the world's food resources. No matter where we are in the United States, all we need to do is look down and the soil is right below our feet. Because everything we do is on top of the soil, and because soil is so critical to everything we need to survive, we always need to be thinking about keeping the soil in mind. Remember, soil is a limited natural resource and it must be conserved. If we love our food, we of course need to love our soil as well. During this lesson unit and the following lesson about compost, students will discover the interesting science behind soil and the components, physical, chemical, and biological, that make a critical medium in traditional agriculture methods. Lesson Plan 3, The Science of Soil and Growing Where We Live. One of the greatest natural disasters of all time occurred during the Great Depression of the 1930s, the Dirty 30s. Americans moved en masse out west to farm the prairie states, America's last agricultural frontier. This massive farming endeavor was to help feed troops in order to win World War I, and was also an uninformed entrepreneurial effort for uneducated farmers known as suitcase farmers. When the fragile ecosystem of the Western Plains grasslands was replaced with wheat fields, there were several initial years of good harvest because of the ample rain. The shifting climate indicative of this area, however, led to 10 years of drought. Overworked farmland began to blow away in giant dust storms, and this area of the U.S. became known as the Great Dust Bowl. Residents could no longer live in this dust-ridden, hazardous area, which held air charged with static electricity that could knock people down when they merely shook hands. Farming here became impossible. Luckily, Hugh Hammond Bennett, a scholarly soil scientist, petitioned Congress in the year 1935 on a day when a great dust storm blew into Washington, D.C. from the west. Seeing was believing, and Congress hated seeing American farming soil blow away. Immediately, they drafted and approved acts that would legislate the ongoing conservation of soil. Soil is a combination of organic material, minerals, gases, liquids, and microbes that work together to support life on Earth. According to a study performed in 1910, little more than 37% of the world's land may be potential for agriculture. This land will not be sufficient for feeding a population of more than 9 billion, which we are projected to have by 2050. A diverse web of activity created between plants and the billions of living microbes and organisms in soil, such as tiny one-celled algae, fungi, bacteria, protozoa, to larger microorganisms such as nematodes and arthropods, to macroorganisms such as insects, earthworms, and small invertebrates and vertebrate animals. The interactions that occur between these organisms create healthy soil that regulates water flow and provides clean air, water, and healthy plants. Particles of soil are grouped into three sizes. The smallest are clay particles, followed by silt particles, and the largest, sand particles. In a soil stratification experiment, these particles can be separated into layers simply by taking a scoopful of soil and placing it into a jar, and then filling the jar with water and a few drops of dish soap. This sample can then be shaken thoroughly and then left to stand overnight, when the three soil particle sizes will striate into three separate layers. Can you hypothesize which soil layer will be on the bottom, middle, and top? Loamy soil typically contains a ratio of 40% silt to 40% sand and 20% clay. This ratio of soil particle sizes produces moisture and nutrient-rich soil that is most desirable for farming. Compost is an organic matter within soil that has been broken down by a process called composting, which utilizes worms and/or microbes to form a nutrient-rich soil amendment. Vermiculite, a volcanic rock that is mined and then blasted to produce a light and airy grain product, when mixed in topsoil, it retains a suitable moisture content for healthy plant root systems. Peat, an amendment used in topsoil mixes that includes partly degraded vegetable and organic material. This fibrous material, when mixed with topsoil, allows soil to be fluffed up and have appropriate air circulation. Gardening where we live can be as traditional as we like, utilizing pots and planters as well as fun and creative, like using found or recycled soil receptacles such as this old truck. What is the most interesting planter you've seen? Do you have something around your home that could make a great conversation-generating planter? Here are some courtyard garden ideas from the Philadelphia Flower Show. A few more garden ideas from the Philadelphia Flower Show. What creative ideas or garden components would you like to try in a courtyard garden of your own? Raised bed gardens allow for efficiently spaced plants and maximum harvest with very little wasted water and nutrient resources. It really didn't take long for a web to become established in our own school raised bed garden. Do you think that the spider that created this web would be helpful in this garden environment or not? Explain your reasoning. Efficiency in planting raised bed gardens also means much less space for weeds. Notice the blue trash can and watering can. This school raised bed garden had a compost resource and pollinating habitat nearby, but there wasn't a nearby watering resource. A trash bin of sun-warmed water and a cup was brought to the bed frequently so that plants could be efficiently watered in at the roots. Adding a flower component, such as this large sunflower, to a raised bed provides visual interest along with an important pollinator habitat. Using this model, students can design an efficient plan for their own raised bed garden. Giving your own raised bed a good start can involve creating a soil mix that is nutrient-rich, with compost, well aerated with peat or sphagnum moss, and moisture retentive with vermiculite or perlite. Have fun working up your own soil blend. Portable gardens are an ingenious way to use limited urban space for efficient growing. These gardens are found and used by the River Park restaurant in New York City. What would you plant in your own milk crate garden? What is the most creative urban growing idea that you can come up with? During this week of the course, educators can use the vocabulary list and activities provided in Lesson Plan 3, The Science of Soils and Growing Where We Live, to give students background about the basics of soil science and growing where we live. Learning about raised bed gardens and creating the soil are fun ways to introduce gardening to students early on. Raised beds have been known as an easy, efficient way to raise nutritious food, and it is a very preferred method in small spaces. In the 1980s, frustrated by row crop farming inefficiencies, Mel Bartholomew, a retired civil engineer, developed a specific raised bed called the square-foot garden. His method of gardening claims that a full harvest can be achieved at half the cost of using 80% less space, 90% less water, 95% less seeds, and 98% less work. During this week, students will learn about soil, raised bed gardening, and they will design and plant their own crops in a personal portable garden. To become familiar with soil particles, students will get their hands dirty as they begin to work with clay, the smallest of all the soil component sizes, to brainstorm ideas about the importance of soil as a natural resource and why we need to conserve it. As the week moves on, students can create their own nutrient-rich garden soil with the Mix Your Own Soil project that we will explain in the upcoming Do-It-Yourself video. Finally, students can design and plant their own portable milk crate raised bed gardens, which they may grow at school or take home. Again, we will take you through this project with the upcoming training video.
Hi, my name's Jolie Shilak, and thank you so much for joining us at school today. The Lehigh County Conservation District and I are really happy to be bringing you this urban ag curriculum, and right now we're working on Unit 3, which is the science of soil, and hopefully you've spent some time working with your students to build your own soil. I have some of the components that we recommend that you use, and this is the compost. This is the peat, and then we of course have vermiculite. And why are we using these 3 different ingredients to make our own soil mix? Well, the compost is great because it's a combination of topsoil that has had organic waste amended into it, that has been composted, and it's got lots of nutrients, and so it's a great food to start feeding the seeds that we put in. The peat is really good because it helps make the soil a bit lighter and fluffier so that when it rains, the rain can distribute all throughout the plant and its soil and drain out really nicely. We also have vermiculite, and that is blasted mica that has been mined, and it's blasted so it also is kind of on the fluffier side, and it's got some crevices in it, so then when plants are watered or when the rain comes, the rain gets stuck on the little pieces of vermiculite and helps to kind of keep the soil moist. So with these 3 things all combined, we have a great mix to start our seeds. So now it's time to start thinking about starting seeds and growing gardens and things like that. I always think it's fun to come up with ways to grow in small spaces, and one thing that I find is that it's often good to find a container to grow in that you can move. Sometimes when you're in an urban setting or just any old backyard, you might have a squirrel that comes along and is interested in the seeds you've planted. So it's nice if you can take your garden and move it if you're finding that there's an unwanted friend coming along. Sometimes we might get heavy rains and you want to bring your garden in. And so if you make it in a container like a milk crate, you're able to do that, have that versatility, or if you want to move it into the sun and that sort of thing. So today we're going to be building a garden in a personal garden that is portable in a milk crate. And I did want to mention to you that there's a restaurant in New York where they have used over 3,000 milk crates in not only on their rooftop, but then on the side of their building, and they're growing all their food, their vegetables and fruits and things like that in these portable crates, and when they need to move them, they do. And so that's kind of a really neat way to get local food even into a city. So to make a portable garden in a milk crate, what do you need to do? You need the milk crate, and that could be a big milk crate if you have the room for that, or you could start with kind of more of a small supply crate like this. You'll also need some landscaping fabric. The landscaping fabric is used, and it comes in big rolls like this, and that's used inside the crate to make sure that all the soil doesn't fall out of the little holes. We'll need some soil, a trowel to get that in, get the soil in, and then some seeds. And we're going to plant radish seeds today. We could plant lettuce in this as well. The other thing that's really useful when you're working with multiple gardens, as you do with students, is to make sure that you have a label with the student's name and what it is they've planted. And I also like to put the date that things have been planted so that you know how far along the plant is and how long it took to germinate and that sort of thing. Okay, so what we're going to do first is take our milk crate, and we need to cut the lining for the milk crate. And so it's good to cut 2 fabric pieces. One that will cover the long part of the crate. So We'll put this in and then we can just fold it down. You don't want a lot of this hanging up and flopping over because when the wind blows, it'll sometimes be blocking the sunlight from the plants if you don't fold it over. Do this side, and so now we're going to go this way with this piece. And as I said, this is just to ensure that the soil doesn't all wash away. Plants will not grow if they don't have lots of soil to do it in. Okay. So now it's time to put in our soil mix, custom made by your students. I like to use my hands. I'll not worry about that. I've mentioned in another video that sometimes students don't like getting their hands dirty. And in that case, make sure you provide them with gloves. Okay. Once we have our soil in, then it's time to decide how many plants we're going to be planting. So if we were going to be planting lettuce today, in a square foot garden, you can plant 4 heads of lettuce. And that's a really nice thing to be able to do because you'll get those 4 heads of lettuce by the end of the season. They're going to be nice and big. There won't be any weeds because the lettuce is taking up that whole space. I would say in this garden, we'd maybe do 2 heads of lettuce. 1 or 2. But actually today we're going to plant radishes. And in a square foot garden you can put 16 radishes. In this garden, I'm going to err on the smaller side. I'm going to say that we'll put 6 radishes in. And so what we're going to do is make the holes for where the radish goes. Let's pull that out of there. So 1. And you try and give them equal distance so each plant has its own space to grow in. Remember, we're making the hole about 1/4 inch, not going down too deep. We want the radish to be able to germinate and hit the sun as quickly as possible. Okay, so I have 6 holes in there. And then I'm going to take the radish seeds, which look like that. And I'm going to put 2 or 3 seeds in each hole. Don't really need more than that. They're really small seeds, but all you need is 1 seed to germinate. So 2 or 3. And if they all happen to germinate, you just thin them out. When they get to being about 2 or 3 inches, pull in them out so there's only 1 growing so that it has all the resources it needs. Okay, so now we can take a little more soil, fill in our holes. And then after that, of course, we have to water the plant. And that's really, really important to give this initial watering because, of course, for a seed to open up and germinate, it needs to be wet. So now it's time to put your garden where it belongs. It can go in a classroom under a grow light or in a windowsill if it's a small one like this. If it is past the last frost in the spring, you can take it outside and find a very sunny spot, hopefully a southern exposure so that this gets as much sun as possible. You can do these in the fall outside as well, as long as you're using root vegetables like radishes. Lettuce does well in the fall. Oh, in fact, I have a larger garden that we planted and we harvested, and it's February right now. But this was outside, and I noticed that one of our plants was still growing strong. And so it's very possible to start a class like this in the fall and have some vegetables growing right into the winter without even bringing them inside. So I hope this will be an interesting project. When we garden, we often get messy, so tell the students we have to get used to this, and it's worth it because it's a lot of fun, and you get lots of good vegetables. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
There are several opportunities to extend the third lesson, The Science of Soils, Growing Where We Live. If this course is taught in the spring, teams of students can design and build one of several raised bed gardens in a southerly outdoor location at school. Even in the fall, raised beds can be planted in some zones with cold harvest vegetables such as radishes and lettuces. Opportunities to explore soil science are also available. With soil chemistry tests, students can analyze soil nutrient content for the three most important soil nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Soil pH can be tested similarly, and discussions about soil fertilization and amendment will be important for the sustainability of the garden. Please refer to the hard copy lesson plan for added resources about soil chemistry and science. Students might also consider having a creative container garden contest as an extension of this lesson. They can compete to see who can recycle the most unique container, such as a boot, old shoe, or soccer ball, as a plant container. Finally, students can have fun watching other students' videos created through the Soil Science Society of America's What Soil Means in My World project. These videos center on the importance of soil conservation and can be found at www.soils.org/careers. With this inspiration, a classroom soil education video could be designed to round out components learned during this session. We hope you enjoyed our quick lesson on the Intro to Urban Agriculture, The Science of Soil and Growing Where We Live. For more information on the Urban Agriculture Field Experiences lesson plan, please visit www.lehighconservation.org or follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube pages. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out the rest of the videos in the Urban Agriculture lesson plan series.